So the other day I was sitting back and reading the Epstein files. This is a pretty easy read. There isn't much text, so it's great for someone like me who is a slow reader. But I will say there are way too many cliffhangers and loose ends, which I hope they resolve in part 2. I was just about to read something incriminating, but somehow conveniently, just at that moment, the algorithm on my TV autoplayed this video.
Late last night and early today, at my direction, the United States Armed Forces conducted an extraordinary military operation in the capital of Venezuela. Overwhelming American military power, air, land, and sea, was used to launch a spectacular assault. And it was an assault like people have not seen since World War II.
Wow. This is a bad thing, right? Or is it a good thing? I mean, that Maduro guy was a dictator, but also the US just invaded another country. My mind was racing with thoughts, so I quickly popped a double dose of benzos to calm myself down. And then I jumped on Facebook to see how many people had the Venezuelan flag transparently superimposed on their profile pics in order to understand the gravity of this situation. Surprisingly, I actually had no one. I really thought there would have been at least one, but maybe I just don't have enough friends. Anyways, this is generally a universal sign that it's probably not that serious, right? Regardless, one thing was guaranteed though. I definitely won't be reading this for a while, so I'll just add it to the deal with it later pile. So now I'm sitting here still kind of nervous. People have been saying for a while that we're on the cusp of World War III, and some people are saying we're already in World War III. All I know is that this attack is definitely not helping ease this scenario. On top of that, every country is pretty much facing increased debt levels, rising cost of living, housing markets that are effectively cooked, and mental health that's on a constant decline. So I'm not convinced that this capture is exactly what the world needs right now. But maybe I'm misunderstanding this. I mean, maybe this could be a good thing. I guess I should investigate and get things straight to hopefully calm my nerves. So I quickly used my TV to subscribe to my favorite YouTube channel and started digging. My understanding of Venezuela really comes down to 6 key things. Nice beaches, a big waterfall, high homicide rates, lots of oil, a dictator, and that the US is obsessed with Venezuelan oil. And that's pretty much all I know. And after some research, it seems that I was basically right. The deeper I went though, the more I realized that if you thought the US loves oil, you should really read about its love of Venezuelan oil. But to understand it more, I needed to go through a bit of a history lesson. So it turns out that back in the day, Venezuela was a pretty chill place, going through the same stuff most other Latin American countries went through. Then eventually they won the lottery and found oil in 1914. As it turns out, it's the largest proven reserve of oil in the world. And as a country, they aren't that far from the USA, right across the Caribbean Sea and the Gulf of Mexico. Sorry, I mean the Gulf of America. So naturally, the US's interest in Venezuela spiked at around this time. Throughout much of the 1900s, the US and Venezuela were mostly on good terms. Venezuela exported tons of oil to the US, and American companies were major investors, extracting oil, providing jobs to local Venezuelans, and adding to the local biodiversity. But then they started arguing over who gets what slice of the pie. So in 1976, Venezuela nationalized its oil industry to keep oil wealth under government control. At its absolute peak, oil accounted for over 90% of export earnings and a massive share of government revenue, which just means that the Venezuelan government was getting a lot of money. From here, Venezuela was reinvesting oil revenue into modernizing production capacity, setting up a sovereign wealth fund for its people, diversifying their economy, upskilling locals, and investing in social infrastructure so that they become one of the most livable places on Earth. Oh wait, sorry, that was Norway. Actually, it turns out that after nationalizing the oil revenue, Venezuela did none of those things, and instead spiraled into mismanagement of funds, embezzlement, corruption, and politically influenced government handouts and subsidies. Anyways, in 1999, some guy called Hugo came into power. Hopefully a new leaf for Venezuela, right? But before we go on, I'm going to be honest. This is where things start to get confusing. There are so many clashing opinions, I started to panic. I mean, I'm just a normal guy. How am I expected to maintain an understanding of decades-long geopolitical issues and then be expected to form a reasonable opinion? So I stopped for a second, took a breath, took a Prozac, and got reading. So I'm going to try summarize this part of history as briefly as I can. Hugo extended the oil nationalization efforts and squeezed foreign oil companies out of Venezuela, which is great, I guess. More economic independence, less profits going to private companies, and more money to Venezuela. But it made the US kind of angry. And initially, yes, high oil profits did occur at around the start of Hugo's presidency, which was used to make improvements in areas like literacy, income equality, healthcare access, and infrastructure. Apparently, the poverty rate was cut by nearly half during his tenure. But then things went south pretty quickly. Remember how Venezuela didn't really invest in upskilling, training, or technology? Well, with all the private companies gone, a lot of the technology and experienced engineers left with them, so Venezuela relied more on politically appointed managers rather than people with actual technical expertise. So efficiency and production got worse. Then the remaining actually skilled engineers and technicians left the country because it just sucked to work there. The worst part of this is, because they were still making so much money, to try and fix this, Hugo just doubled down on the oil industry to extract more oil and increase selling to countries like Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. Hugo essentially made Venezuela even more dependent on oil than before, and made the US even angrier than before. So naturally, investments fell, maintenance slipped, expertise continued to leave, infrastructure decayed, and whenever the oil price crashed, the Venezuelan economy also crashed. Political control over the oil industry increased and corruption exploded. Billions in oil revenue would go missing and would just allegedly disappear through mismanaged contracts and outright theft. People were getting angry, and things were getting pretty bad, but Hugo controlled it by taking control of the media, militarizing the government, eroding independent institutions, jailing political opponents, and rigging elections. And if you don't know, these steps are really just the basics to becoming a dictator. Anyways, Hugo was getting sick, and then he died in 2013, so his vice president Maduro took his place. Then what followed was just Maduro doing the same stuff that Hugo did, with each election getting more and more suspicious, keeping himself in power for 13 years. In that time, the US sanctioned Venezuela at some point, making things worse for Venezuelans. The US also kept trying to get the government to change, and the US used blockades on oil shipments, claiming they were sending oil to corrupt networks. Oh, and also all this drug narcotic stuff started being reported in the media quite recently, which was clearly the trigger for the US because that's why they decided to break in and take Maduro and his wife on warrants for narco-terrorism and drug trafficking. Nothing to do with the oil at all. Actually, no. The Trump administration seems to be quite clearly focusing on seizing the oil now, and not the narcotics. So it was pretty much all really just for the oil. Honestly, after reading all this, it didn't really help calm me down at all. If anything, I just made myself feel worse. It sounds like everyone involved is really mean and greedy, and now they are still just mean and greedy. So I thought, hey, what do the leaders, politicians, and diplomats around the world think about this? And yeah, pretty much everyone, friend or foe of the US, is against this. Brazil, Mexico, France, Spain, Germany, the United Nations, China, Russia, South Africa, just to name a few. Most are primarily concerned with the international law implications because essentially at this point it's just schoolyard rules. If you are rich and strong enough, you can just do whatever you want. But then there is also this person, Maria Machado. Remember her? She was battling it out with Trump to win the Nobel Peace Prize last year. Well, as it turns out, she was very supportive of Trump's approach to Venezuela, and when she did win, she actually dedicated the Peace Prize to Trump. Now Trump has removed Maduro and Maria is happy with the approach, but sad that it looks like the Trump administration are now not letting Venezuelans choose their own government through decisions and elections. At the end of the day, Maria is Venezuelan, and most Venezuelans do not like Maduro. Now that Maduro has been removed, people are celebrating. They're cautious but hopeful for the future. But remember that the Iraqis didn't like Saddam Hussein, so they also celebrated and were hopeful for their future when the US got rid of him. But as usual, things didn't turn out too well for them after that, did it? So is the US a protector of freedom, a resource-hungry monster, or something messier in between? And is Venezuela a victim, a failed state, or a complex society coping with internal and external pressures? I think the answer is just, well, yes. The more I read, the more it seems to be all of the above. Everyone seems to be at fault and everything is just so messy. The main thing that almost everyone agrees on though is that Maduro sucked, but the US's actions now and throughout history are just not the way to go about it, and this definitely doesn't help current global tensions. History has shown time and time again that when a foreign government interferes too much, things just don't work out. But don't forget that the US military has intervened in Latin America on more than 70 occasions throughout history, so maybe they'll get it right this time. Anyways, I gotta get to work tomorrow, so sorry for confusing you more and wasting your time, folks. But remember, boys and girls, to pray for Venezuela, pray for Greenland, and subscribe. I promise it's good for you. Catch you later, friends.